Hey guys, it's Asia, and I'm going to be starting a new series on my channel called Sewing and Storytime. With that being said, I'm still going to do the same exact tutorials that I've been doing in the past, but the voiceover is going to be of me sharing a story. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I've always loved fashion and history, and I just want to find a way to combine the two. So here we are. The kinds of stories that I'll be talking about are about events that have happened throughout history that aren't really well known, not really talked about much, and definitely weren't things that we learned in school growing up. So I think it'll just be a fun twist on the normal tutorials that I do. So with that being said, I'm gonna show you guys how I made this tie-dye shirt, and I'll be telling the story of the Radium girls who were factory workers who contracted radium poisoning and fought from their deathbeds to seek justice for women and workers everywhere. In the early 1900s, radium was in. This newly discovered radioactive element was used in a number of everyday products, including toothpaste, cosmetics, food, and water, with a claim that it would rejuvenate the skin, cure arthritis, and leave one feeling stronger and healthier. The most common use for radium was for painting the dials of clocks and watches, making them glow in the dark. In 1917, the US entered World War I, and these watches became a necessity for soldiers on the front lines in order for them to see their watch dials at night to better coordinate night attacks. Enter the U.S. Radium Corporation. To supply this demand, the U.S. military partnered with the U.S. Radium Corporation to produce glow-in-the-dark wristwatches. The U.S. Radium Corporation began hiring young women to paint the dials and tiny numbers onto these wristwatches with radioactive paint. With the job paying nearly 3 times the average working woman's wage, new hires were eager and excited to work for the company. These women, who became known as the Radium Girls, were taught a technique called lip pointing, where after painting each number and dial, they were to lick their paintbrush to make it more pointed, and then continue painting each dial number. After each shift, the women would be covered in radium dust, which in turn made them glow in the dark. They would often wear their nicest dresses to work, so that when they went out dancing in the evening, they would shine in the night. Their supervisors assured them that there was no harm in using the radium-infused paint, but they were wrong. By 1921, Radium Girl Molly's teeth began to fall out. Shortly after, ulcers began to develop in her mouth, and several months later, her jaw began to break apart and had to be taken out completely, along with a piece of her ear. Unbeknownst to her and her doctors, it was the radium that was boring holes into her bones and slowly destroying her body from the inside out. Less than a year later, the disease took Molly's life. Almost as if like clockwork, former co-workers of Molly began to fall ill with the same symptoms. One woman's vertebrae collapsed, while another experienced throat cancer. Others experienced loose teeth, hair loss, extreme exhaustion, and aching joints, which were later determined to be symptoms of exposure to radium. By 1924, allegations began to swirl about U.S. radium and their hazardous work environment, a claim that they venomously denied, stating that there were no connections between the girl's death and the company. In 1925, a test was developed that proved once and for all that radium had poisoned many of the Radium girls. U.S. Radium tried to discredit the findings, even going as far as covering up the scandal by falsifying documents and encouraging doctors to list their cause of death as syphilis. In 1927, Grace Fryer, along with 4 other surviving Radium girls, filed a lawsuit against U.S. Radium for damages of $250,000, with some of them hoping to use the money to cover their own funeral expenses. However, U.S. Radium tried to delay the hearing for as long as possible, hoping that the ailing women would pass before the trial began. And they almost succeeded, because by the time of the trial in 1928, 2 of the 5 women were bedridden, and none of them were strong enough to raise their right hand to take an oath in court. In the end, U.S. Radium settled out of court, paying each woman $10,000 with an additional payment of $600 a year. The Radium Girls case shed a worldwide light on the dangers of radium, with the federal government setting basic safety regulations for handling radium. The events that led up to their deaths formally changed worker compensation laws in the U.S. and brought about the formation of OSHA. Despite their horrific experiences and the lawsuit that followed, the lives of the Radium girls were not in vain.